Okay, welcome back to the night shift. Your safe space for talking about UFOs, UAPs, NHI, and everything else your friends, family, and coworkers are sick and tired of hearing you go on and on about. Great to be back. I'm joined by Xander Jones, the wind beneath my wings. How you doing, Xander?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm living the dream.
As always.
I'm living the dream. Welcome to everybody in the chat. Welcome to Chris Hovard, our mod squad, Chris and Brett. Brett just had a birthday. Big happy birthday shout out to Brett. I don't know. How old are you, Brett? Are you here? Where are you? Who else is here? Sage Sleuth, Matthew Kane, Adam Wright, Rach Beal, George, Lord McCormick, Brian Park, Samantha C. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to be back with you all. Thanks for being here on this Friday. It's time for our weekly roundup, a little bit of Lose Clues, and a special guest. We have a special guest who will be dropping in momentarily. Dan Goler, or Goler? I'm going to get him to correct me on his name when he gets here. The director of the upcoming documentary, The Discovery, which is about a way to use lasers, refracted lasers, and DMT to actually see and visually examine the code that makes up the matrix that we're all trapped inside of. It's really exciting. We're going to look at the trailer, and it's a mind melter. So if you haven't already seen it, you're in for a treat. And we'll talk to Dan about that project and his work in that area. It was a big news week. Lots going on. Apparently something huge is going to happen. It seems like that's the message coming from every direction. It's time to batten down the hatches, get prepared. At least that's what Danny Sheehan's been saying. He's been out on the podcast circuit doing interviews and saying that it's time to prepare the human family for some kind of enormous event. He threw it out there. He said an alien intervention.
I think we've had Danny join us.
Danny's here. Okay, we'll come back to the alien intervention.
Cut the music.
I entered at the right time. How are you guys?
How you doing, Danny?
I was trying to find the link because it was a different email. Apologies for being a bit late. How are you, everybody?
It's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
You planned that background. Sick background.
Oh, dude, it's the best because we're picking up equipment for. Actually, we're going to shoot a scene for the weekend for the movie, and the production company that helps us do with all the equipment, they are at the corner in Burbank where they shot Back to the Future. So everything is Back to the Future themed.
Oh, wow.
Their murals. It's hilarious.
That's great.
It's amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
A lot of DeLorean energy.
I definitely nerded out on it. Look what they have in the bathroom. I don't know if you can see it from here.
I can't see it. What am I looking at?
It's a little blurry. It's the flex capacitor. It's right up. It's up right above the toilet.
Above the toilet. That's great. Is that the original flux capacitor? That's
know.
not the original prop, is it? Oh man, when you get that toilet up to 88 miles per hour, what happens? We were just talking about you, and then you came in right at the dramatic music. Xander had it all queued up, ready to go, and you kind of appeared. It was great. Great timing.
Thank you.
Are you working on this, the Discovery project right now? Is that what you're there shooting for?
We're going to shoot an interview this weekend in San Francisco. So yeah, we're picking up some equipment right now.
Oh, okay, great. And by the way, what is the right way to pronounce your last name?
Goler.
Goler. Okay, Goler. We were going back and forth. Goler. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. We were super excited to look at the trailer for your documentary a few episodes back, and it was a real mind melter. We we talk mainly about UFOs and UAPs and disclosure on this channel, but there's a lot of overlap between that conversation and the investigation of consciousness and that whole world. And so I thought there was a great opportunity here to kind of dig into the work that you've been doing. It's really fascinating stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the premise of the film, and then we'll look at the trailer and we can kind of give people a taste of what this is all about?
Yeah, a few years ago, the nutshell of it is that a few years ago, I discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on any surface and you ingest a particular molecule that I usually cannot name in live chats, I have a daily live chat, and I also can never say it because of legal reasons, but you can just Google the spirit molecule, and you will see code running in surfaces, literally like in the Matrix. And I mean, I guess that's a conversation opener, because there's so many questions, right? Why would it be something we recognize? Why would it kind of be like in the movie? Why would it, all these questions? Short answer is I have no idea, but the facts are the facts. And now we have over 1,000 observations worldwide, and it's always the same. It doesn't follow the same trend and what you would call hallucinations would follow. And we can talk about the reasons for that. One of them is that the brain doesn't actually produce content. It's not what the brain does. The brain is a very, very sophisticated guessing machine. So if you have something extremely, so to speak, solid, so it's insistent to be what it is, in other words, spatial, coordinates that don't really care about where you are, behavior, shape, attributes that seem to be the same for everybody, then it opens a whole new set of questions, right? And that's kind of what started the conversation. I released a video about this a few years ago. It got me a little bit of attention. I was invited to a few places to talk about it. And then one of my videos went viral on TikTok, and then more people reached out. And as expected, of course, these conversations are usually concentric circles. So like it's kind of like waves. You have the people that are totally on board, there's the pushback, and then it goes in concentric circles around the different parts of society, from pop culture to now scientists weighing in on it. So that's essentially where we are. And if just to create a little bridge into, I guess, the UFO thing, I personally never saw the connection in the space, at least. I mean, I understand that it has to be something. Ultimately, it has to be some relationship, but I don't really see it myself. However, I would say that the timing of this whole thing, with everything you guys are talking about, with the disclosure, which I know a lot less about, seems to be not coincidental, I would say. And I do think that if these things are real, and I think we have at this point many reasons to believe that these things are real, I would say that I do fall under the umbrella of people that think that they are multidimensional. And I also believe that searching for extraterrestrials through things like SETI, through radio waves, is absurd. So, and I think if anything, they would come to us through the mind space, because that's really what the majority of most things in the universe resides.
So you don't typically you're not really involved in the day-to-day of the UFO UAP topic. You're more focused, obviously, on the work that you've been doing.
Not at all. And to be honest with you, so my trajectory through that space was, as I guess for many people, when I was a kid, I was very interested in that. I saw one for sure. I know I saw one when I was a kid. I never got obsessed with it. I never really got. I think in general, all of these topics that I used to be fascinated by as a kid, the whole idea of ancient civilizations knowing more than us, that whole memeplex, right? Which I guess the UFO is kind of like hovering somewhere adjacent there. And obviously was super fascinated by that when I was a kid. And then when I got older, I kind of got discharmed from the dead ends that it always leads to. I was very into Bob Lazar, and then it kind of fell off the map. I was very much into what all the people who do more of the off the map investigation of everything in Egypt, right? And again,
like Graham Hancock and stuff like
Graham
that.
Hancock, of course, yeah, but not just him. Just this, he's just like the most known name. But there's a lot of people that do that, and just overall, every time you really look deeply, it I noticed that it kind of falls off. The trail kind of trails off, and then what's interesting is that the people that investigated, they don't go, well, we don't know, like this is kind of like we don't know how to resolve this. They kind of trail off. It's almost like, like an uncomfortable conversation that you have, in the end of it, you don't know what to say. So it's like, so anyways, and then you just move on to the next subject as if nothing happened. And I didn't like that. I'm like, that seems to be like you're not really following the thread that you yourself are going through, right? And this is just my preference of how I like to see the world. I like to land on concrete ground, even in these like very esoteric territories. And because of that, I guess I lost interest. What's interesting is that now that I guess, rekindled some of my relationship with these things because of what I discovered, now when I look closer, I realize that actually there was something there. It's just that for some reason, we don't really know how to put it in the right bin. And we don't know how to frame it in a way that they can communicate to more mainstream science. And then the whole thing is just kind of, like friction based versus conversation based. And that by itself was a little, disappointing. But I think we're at a step in history where all of these things will converge and we'll start to understand how they actually relate to one another. But I always maintain through my entire, the whole thing that I'm doing, from the movie to the way that I talk about is on podcasts and things like this. I'm a big proponent of, if it's real, it can take the pressure. So it's fine to probe. And by the way, it's fine to admit then, like, well, okay, that thing we thought is probably not true. Like that's also okay to say. And that's kind of where I stand with all these things.
It definitely seems interesting hearing your perspective from the other side of this, because it seems like from internally within the UFO UAP community, whatever understanding there is to be had about the phenomenon seems to always lead directly through a big discussion about what is consciousness, what is the nature of reality. Do we even understand what we're talking about here from a base fundamental level? Do you think that just based on the work that you've been doing, and then I want to take a look at the trailer,
Sure.
People like Andrew Gallimore or Donald Hoffman, or we've heard Baldwin say recently that in a presentation with Neil deGrasse Tyson, they're finding things that resemble computer code. Mm-hmm. Do you think that we just have a fundamentally incorrect or incomplete picture of what reality actually is from a starting point?
Yeah, I think Hoffman is definitely on the money. And I kind of hover in between. I'm combining and we can talk more in depth about what these things are, but probably your viewers would know. So Donald Hoffman's frame, I think, is very, very strong, combined with a much bigger base of idealism that is most popularized best by Bernardo Kastrup. If you guys are not familiar, I highly recommend to check him out. And then Gallimore is a huge influence because he's, his book Reality Switch Technologies, I think, does a lot of heavy lifting by basically pointing out the fact that what I said in the beginning, which is that the brain doesn't produce content. It's not what it does. So if you have like an extremely coherent something, it has to be real in some sense. And then you have to talk about what does that mean. And then combined with, on a more technical, from a more technical frame, I think the most promising frame we have is a combination of the holographic principle, which is pretty mainstream actually in physics at this point, and Stephen Wolfram's new physics project, which I know also was under a lot of heat and criticism by the physics community, but I do think that is definitely there. So I'm kind of hovering in between all these things, and we can open them up, but each one of them is like a long topic. So why
don't we show people the trailer so they can get an idea of what exactly we're talking about here? Because it's something else. I think they need to see it, and then we can come back and go there.
I remember things very vividly from a very young age. When I was a little kid, I actually spent a lot of time with my grandparents. My grandfather was a nuclear physicist. I remember he was telling me about black holes. And that terrified me.
I was like, that's just mind-boggling. It's a monster, right?
But at the same time, it fascinated me. And I said to myself, how do we know that? This unthinkably massive thing. I realized that nature doesn't keep secrets. It's only a matter of, do we understand? What tools can we use to expand our knowledge? And for me, dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT, was the tool that led me to the discovery.
When I first saw the phenomenon, I was like, holy shit!
But then it was actually like, whoa, what is happening?
Am I losing my mind? But then I showed other people, and things kept getting weirder.
Just for the record, I haven't told him anything. Okay, just tell me what you see.
Oh my god, come on.
Wow, what the fuck? Holy shit. I just saw something. Yeah. What the fuck?
Oh, I see that. I feel it.
I've been under the influence of mind-altering substances a lot, but I've never seen anything like that. Whoa.
I showed over 100 people, and I kept asking myself, how are all of us seeing the same thing?
Oh my god. It's changing shapes right there.
The laser was revealing numbers and letters running in a pattern.
They're almost like this big here, and it looks like code.
It looked like programming code.
It's definitely saying something, and I just want to take a picture of it and translate it.
Wow.
You see that?
Okay, so yeah, it's not stuck.
No.
It's not because of the light.
No, it's on its own side. Light is just literally revealing it.
And each angle shows you different layers, different ways through it.
I could see through the wall. It's not like a hallucination. It has spatial awareness and permanence. I don't know. Whoa.
For centuries, mankind has attempted to explore these psychedelic, altered states, but we've never had a repeatable, testable phenomenon to observe until now.
Wow. I'm obsessed.
It's like you can see through the laser into another dimension.
I mean, like, take yourself to that. Like, I just made a connection that nobody made before, which is a simple connection. The claim is, if you project a diffracted laser on the surface and you smoke DMT, you will see code running in surfaces. Yes, like in the Matrix.
So there are a few possibilities. One,
I lost my mind, which is the coolest losing your mind ever in history.
the second option is that
This is the biggest discovery of humankind. If anybody ever asked themselves what it would be like to know you live in the Matrix for sure, well, I know for sure. I'm convinced.
So where do we go from here? All I know is
It's about to get crazy.
What does it feel like to know you live in the Matrix?
Wow, what a great question. You know, for a long time, I thought that maybe it doesn't really influence you that much. There's definitely a gut punch to know for sure. The laser is not what did it for me, and this is something that I later was pointed out to me by my fiance actually. That but because you know, I'm talking about this and this is what I'm also saying in the trailer, and I'm saying it in my first videos, that the code is what essentially makes us understand we live in the Matrix. I only later realized that for me, the full conviction doesn't actually come from the code. It's from my other interactions in that space. And it's always very difficult to put yourself in the mind that you're not in, right? So when you already know something, it's actually difficult to remind yourself what it's like to not know that, or to be in a state in which you don't know that. And I realized that just by seeing the code, it's not necessarily automatically telling you that you live in the matrix. And this is why I have a lot of sympathy for people who, saying, well, why do you think that necessarily means we live in the matrix? I'm telling you this because the reason I know, I will definitely answer these questions as well, is because they just showed me. So I asked, I don't know how much your audience is familiar with the whole spirit molecule space, but
maybe we should set that up for them first before you go where you're. I know where you're about to go, but just for the people who aren't clear on this, can you set that up? What is DMT? Why is it critical to this?
So the DMT is essentially, as it's dubbed, the spirit molecule. It stands for dimethyltryptamine. It's I used to call it a neurotransmitter until Gallimore was actually on my podcast recently, and I asked him point blank if we can call it a neurotransmitter. He said no, definitely not a neurotransmitter because it has particular definitions. But it definitely is one of the components in the brain that influences your perception on a regular basis, and your body makes it. It is also in many living things. We have reasons to believe that it's actually in every living organism, but we don't know that for sure. We know that your lungs make it. I think the liver makes some of it as well. Surprisingly, because a lot of people believe the pineal gland that is always associated with like a spiritual awakening and being the third eye. A lot of people, there's a big meme about the pineal gland making DMT, but Gallimore said actually that we have reasons to believe it does not.
But the lungs do. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, because we know there's a high concentration there. What's interesting is that maybe a tiny side tangent, because it is very relevant and interesting. John Dean, who's the Dr. John Dean, who's now running the extended state studies, which means they're gonna put people in a lab intravenously and keep you there indefinitely until they decide to take it off. And they're already doing it in the Imperial College in London, but now they're starting to do it in San Diego. Dr. John Dean is the person who's running the study in San Diego. A few years ago, he wrote a paper, and he actually discovered, and that was in rats or in mice, I think, not in humans yet, but he discovered that, at least in mice, there's comparable amounts of DMT in their intracranial liquid to dopamine and serotonin. Now that's big, because we used to think there's only like trace amounts. And now we understand that it's literally the same levels of dopamine and serotonin, which are major components of the day-to-day vicissitude of how you feel, right? And they're also so we haven't tested this in humans yet, but I think there's strong reasons to believe that would be the same. So he thinks that it's actually buffering your experience in general. Under that frame, we don't know if that's true yet, but if it is true, then under that frame, it would mean that all hallucinations, they're essentially just more content of what reality can provide. Essentially, you bring more of the substance that allows you to perceive reality. Basically.
You're opening the filter up a little bit to allow more.
Exactly. And you can frame it in many metaphorical ways. The feeling for me experientially is that it actually allows you to see more frames per second of reality itself. Not just visually. Yeah, not just visually, but like computational steps that your brain can take in any given moment. And so if there's some content exists every third frame and you only see every 5 frames, you can't see these things. But when you see more frames, now you can see all the stuff that is hidden or invisible to you, which, by the way, would explain some of the UAP phenomena.
Yes.
So, because I know, and this is something that you guys are much closer to, and I know I'm a novice in this field. I don't really know much, but I do know that what's his name, Gary Nolan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So and again, I know you guys know all about that, but he talks about these cases where people seem to see one thing and then they say, but I saw something else. So it would make sense that if they can manipulate the mind space, they can basically project, manifest as whatever it is that they want to project themselves as. And it would make sense that the majority of what the universe really is actually mind. And that from a third person perspective behaves like a computational system. So you can say that the first person experience of it is mind. The third person experience of it is it behaves like a computational system, which is all the evidence that you hear now, so Dr. Sylvester and Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about it and all that stuff. So now this is why dimethyltryptamine is involved. I think this is also why you can see the code with it and you can't see it without it. To your question as to how it feels, so in the molecule space, there's usually this communication with beings, and that happens very often to many people. And when I discovered the laser, it seems like they actually changed something about my perception of the molecule space. I don't know if this was something that they physically changed about my brain, but I could feel it physically. I could feel like they're doing something. Like I could feel like taps on my right-hand side. There was something that they were changing. And then I started seeing the molecule space more like an augmented reality, like a continuation of my regular space versus just every time being taken into hyperspace. Okay. And within this combination of different new interactions that I've observed is that they started talking to me very directly and much more human pace. So like less kind of like, again, this is a lot to take in by people who've never done it, but everything is very, very rapid in that space. It's very fast. It's like the fastest roller coaster you've ever been on. It's like within 30 seconds, you're being hurled into this space that truly this is something that Terence McKenna used to say. He said, you could believe it only if it wasn't happening to you.
Well, let's tease that just out a little bit because people who aren't familiar maybe just have no idea what we're talking about here. You're talking about a place generally thought of as a place called DMT hyperspace. And this is something that Terence McKenna and others throughout history of the research into psychedelics have discussed at length as a actual place. Yeah. Apparently, this is how I understand. Correct me if I get this wrong.
No, you got it exactly right. Yeah.
When you take a sufficient amount of DMT, you go there. Your consciousness goes there, and your body stays wherever it is, and your your consciousness is in this place, and then you can interact with beings. People often report DMT elf type beings, DMT elves, machines, big cities. That feels like a place, more or less.
And the most important thing to point out is not even the specifics of the content, but how it feels. So if you ask yourself, how do you know that when you wake up from a dream, you now know it's reality? You never think about it because it doesn't matter. You just know. But if you look closely, there are parameters your brain is using to determine that. And one of them is edge detection. So in dreams, things are more flowy. They're more cloud-like. In reality, things are more there, right? And you can see where surfaces end. So that's one parameter. Another one is continuity over time. So like things are not just jumping around and becoming something else every second. So when you're in a dream, you don't notice it, probably because your prefrontal cortex is not fully intact, but you don't notice the fact that things just kind of change unless you're lucid dreaming. But in reality, you notice that, and then you can see the difference. You look back at the dream and go, oh, right. Okay, over there it was more kind of like murky and not clear, and here it's more here, right? And so these parameters, notice that it's the quality of it, not the content. So you can still experience very wild things in reality, but you would still know the reality because of the quality of how it feels. So that quality or set of qualities, imagine taking it one level up. So when you smoke DMT, it feels like this was the dream. And I mean it not metaphorically. I mean it actually. It feels like you wake up one level up and you go, what? Like this was the dream? So because things are more continuous, the edge detection goes up, everything is more robust, more complex, and coherent. So not just complex in the sense of like, craziness. No, none of that. It's just things are very concrete, but they're just very complex, and you can understand this complexity, including, by the way, extra spatial dimensions. And I can't really tell you why you know, but you kind of know, just like you know that this is 3D, you know it's 4D or 5D. And so that's essentially I think the biggest umbrella I can give people who have never done it to explain why it feels like it's a real place.
Would you say
the brain using to determine that it's a dream, they go one level up?
Would it be fair to say that in your experience, when you're in that DMT hyperspace, that feels like base reality to you? more or less?
I think that there is no base reality. I think that what's going on is that there's levels, and I guess you can say you go all the way up to whatever that is, omega point, source, whatever you want to call it. I think it's clear that there has to be a place like that. Terence McKenna called it the eschaton at the end of time. Some people call it God, whatever you want to call it. I think that even from the most rational, physicalist perspective, even, you have to conclude that at somewhere, everything has to tie into this unified something. Right? What is that something? That's up for debate. But it does feel like it's just levels. And the closer you get to the ultimate thing, the more real it feels, so to speak. And then I guess you can say that the real is the thing from which everything is emanating from.
But the DMT hyperspace, in your view, is at least one level up in realness, on the realness scale from where we're at today.
Yeah, and you can go higher, and you can go higher. So there's depending on it feels infinite.
Is that
and you know that
dose dependent?
Dose dependent, also dependent on your state and your ability to navigate to some degree. In the beginning, it definitely feels like it's just like a cacophony of craziness, but eventually you learn how to find. And I can say to anybody who is doing it that if you haven't noticed, you can actually navigate by focusing on this. So, some people would say the heart, but like just this part of your body. This part of the body holds a particular signature of experience in which you feel the world. And you can actually get a lot more from the space and understand it better, and even understand it visually better if you don't focus on what you see, but focus on what it feels like. And then everything kind of snaps into place. It becomes more concrete. So this is something that not a lot of people realize, but when you do it enough, you realize. There's another type of DMT, which honestly, it's a completely different thing. I don't even think they should share the name. It's called 5-MeO DMT, 5-methoxy. It's just the name of the molecule. It's different. The DMT we usually talk about is NN-DMT because it's 2 nitrogen molecules attached to it. And that's the one that your body makes. 5-methoxy is the one that I guess people call toad. Some people call it the God molecule. It feels very, very different. It doesn't have that visual component. It does sometimes accompanied by visuals, but it's more this. So it's more just your body just dissolves. You're just pure feeling, and very often you feel something. You're in the presence of something that I guess you would call the creator or God or something like that. And I can tell you from experience the difference between them for me. And again, I always offer this caveat because I feel like I must. There's always some trepidation that I'm saying it because I know that these creatures are real. But it feels like if NN was management company, 5-MeO is the architect. Like it's kind of like you really can't. It's true to say that there's not much you can say about it because it's you enter a state in which even the conceptual mapping of whatever it is doesn't work. You know, but you can't grab it with any conceptual framework whatsoever. It's just impossible. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because to your question as to if it just dose dependent, I think it's also navigation dependent. So if enough DMT gives you fuel, you still have to navigate somehow. And that navigation is according to your state of being, I would say, including, by the way, where your mind is, where your feeling is, and all of that stuff. Some people separate them. Some people say, well, you got to be less cerebral. You got to feel more. They're not separate. They're the same thing.
Mm-hmm. It's like the whole set and setting conversation too.
Well, no, I'm just saying that your mental space is the same space that from which you're, I guess, more, the tangibility of things, like the way you feel things, right? It's the same space. It's emanating from the same space. There's no difference there.
We're probably getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but just to go there, since we're on this topic, do you feel confident that when you experience this space, can you bring information back here that's useful? Have you been able to do that?
Well, the reason we're talking, I think, right?
I mean, information beyond that it's there and it's real. Like, can you bring, are you able to access? We talk a little bit on this channel about remote viewing, for instance.
Oh, I see. So like something that would be applicable to something that you can do, a new thing. More or less, yeah, something like that. My impression is that it's not how it works. So my impression is that the validity of functionality, let's call it that. So in other words, knowledge about possibilities in any particular space, they're kind of limited to that space. So if you want to say, can you come up with something that you couldn't do before just by going and asking these beings and they're going to tell you how to build a spaceship?
Mm-hmm.
My answer is no. But the reason you can't is because the validity of the functionality of your three-dimensional objects are limited and are enclosed within where you are. So when you're going to be asking them, is not like, it's not a thing that they can tell you how to do because the functionality of it doesn't exist in their space.
It doesn't translate.
It doesn't translate. But they can give you a more universal concept that might apply to something from which you can deduct how to do certain things. So as I'm sure maybe some of your listeners know, but in many cases, people brought back information like the double helix, for example, of the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the first Intel chip was created this way because one of the engineers that was working on he couldn't figure out how to do some of the actual mapping of the transistors. And then he was part of the study with LSD in which they were looking for problem-solving dose. And they found that it was actually around 90 micrograms. And they asked engineers and physicists and mathematicians to come with some kind of a problem they couldn't solve for like 3 months, a year. And they discovered that in the whopping majority of them, with 90 mics, they could solve the problem. So, and he was one of the people in that study. And this is how one of the first chips was created. So, but I think that what was operative there is not that they told him, okay, you put this thing over here. It's like, I don't think that's what they told him. I think what he downloaded was that there's a generally better way of working with geometry that has to do with electricity and signal transfer that is universal. And you can take that and you can translate that to your three-dimensional space, and now you have some real information. But
so it's more like a creative.
We are the bridge. We are the bridge that translates.
I see what you mean. It's like a nudge. They can nudge you in the right direction, but it's actually you've got to functionally put it into terms that make sense in this. That makes sense. So let's talk about the symbols that people see and the laser itself and how you came to this understanding. Like what led to this discovery in the first place?
With everything I just described, the DMT space already feels ultra realistic, like super realistic. But then I started having sets of experiences on top of that after years of doing it that were even more realistic than that. And I don't know how to deliver this point. I think it's impossible, but it was just reality, just with all this extra content. And I was feeling their gravity, and literally the space would come into my room. Beings would appear in my room that were as tangible as human beings. So I could feel their presence, like physical presence. And at that point I said, okay, this cannot be a hallucination. This cannot be in my brain, or at least this cannot just be what we call, mind-made. This has to be real. And then I started asking myself, okay, well, if this is real, how can we possibly or potentially answer that question, but really answer it? Because most answers are very esoteric. It's kind of like, oh, well, you'll know when you look through your third eye. I'm like, no, hold on. If the space is real, it has a geometry, it has a topology, it has a behavior, it has rules, and it has an entry point. We all enter it somehow. So I started thinking from first principles. Okay, what do we know for sure without, like, that's unshakable? And one of them was, well, light I knew is involved because I see it with my eyes, right? So light is somehow involved, even if the brain is participating heavily, but the eyes are informing me in some way. So I knew light had to be involved. And then I started thinking about, I don't know why I had this conviction, but I had this conviction that if it's real, then we all have to have at least one point where we all enter and it's the same. Because if it's real, it starts somewhere, it ends somewhere in some way. And then I started thinking along these directions, and obviously the first thing I did is I tried to ask them. And this is also, by the way, how I know they can't tell you, because there seems to be either a rule or it just that doesn't work that way. But they never
The beings that you would encounter, you're asking
Yeah,
them.
I would ask them, and I was like, hey, can you, like, if this is real, like, can you tell me something that I can prove to people that you're real, right? And then they would tell you all kinds of interesting and fun things, but they were very not applicable in our space. And they would, for example, one of the ways in which they established with me originally that they're real is that the first thing that happened to me with that experience that was ultra realistic was that literally a frog dude just appeared in my room right next to me. And at that point, I truly thought this time I've done it. I was like,
you broke your brain. Yeah.
I was like, and then the whole room started pointing at my guitar. There was a guitar at the end of the room. And then in a split second, I realized, they want to communicate through like music theory or something. And I'm not a musician. I'm just like practicing. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like I won't understand. And they're like, go to the guitar. I'm like, okay. So I go to the guitar, and then it disappears from one side of the room and appears right next to me, like at light speed. Just appears next to me. And then he puts his frog fingers on the guitar, like where you strum and where you do the chords. And he's like, do this. Like, he didn't say it, but he's like, do this. And I'm like, okay. And then I started doing what he was showing me slowly, and music started coming out. So he's like, you don't know how to do this. This is real information. I'm real. So I was like, that's when I knew like nothing will ever be the same. And it's funny because I used to rent out the other room for Airbnb back then, and I was living right next to UCLA, and it was a postdoc in physics actually from Italy that was staying in that room, and his name was Marco. So I just exclaimed his name at 2 a.m. when that happened. I was just like, Marco, and then it was like, well, luckily he didn't wake up. What am I going to tell him? The frog from another dimension taught me how to play the guitar. It's
an awesome story.
That'll be the end of the Airbnb stay. So luckily he didn't wake up, but I called my best friend, and he came over like at 3 a.m. because I called him in a very frantic way. I was like, you got to come over here right now. And he's like, okay. Came over. I told him what happened. And he's very not only open-minded, but we've done a lot of these things together. It's not like he's foreign to the craziness. But when I told him that, he looked at me and he goes, I think you need to lay down. And I'm like, no. You don't understand. I'm fine. This was real. This is real. And he's like, he just couldn't. I see that he couldn't compute this. And then I started looking online, and I discovered that this actually happens. Some people have this, like, not just DMT experience, but like ultra realistic DMT experience where they talk to aliens. Like, this happens. Actually, I read a funny case in Florida. There was this therapist who this started happening to him, and he dropped everything and he started talking to aliens, and that's all he did for like, kind of like me, for like a year. It's not all I did. I also did regular life, but he dropped everything. And eventually he had to go to a shrink himself. And the other therapist told him that he's not talking to aliens and he needs to stop doing that. And but anyways, and this is how kind of, I realized that it's really funny because I was convinced at that point. I was like, if this is a schizophrenic outbreak, I seem to be fine. Like, I'm going to work. I'm normal. Yes, I fit the age because it usually happens around the beginning of your 30s. If it happens, but like I was fine. So I was like, no. I know myself. Like, this is real. And that's how it started. And then it took me years of thinking about it. There was, this is what the movie is about. It is kind of like a long story. But then eventually, with all kinds of hints that started appearing, one of the main thoughts was, because like I said, light had to be involved. So I'll just tell you this one part. So I'm walking in the middle of the night, and I'm also an editor. That's my main bread and butter. And I was working on a music video, and I couldn't fix a color problem in one of the scenes for hours, and I was frustrated. So I said, okay, can I take a break? I'm gonna go to Ralph's, get a sandwich, relax. I'm going in the middle of the night. I used to say that it was like in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. Recently, we went there and to reconstruct the scene, and I looked at the pictures, and it saves the time. So I think I just confabulated. It was like around 11 or midnight, but it doesn't matter. But it just shows you how flimsy the brain is with remembering things. And I walk and I was thinking about this because I was thinking about this often about like how we prove this stuff. And I was thinking about specifically about the double slit experiment and about the fact that the reason that quantum computers work is because what they utilize is the fact that something happens to the qubit that it actually, when it's in a superposition, it for lack of a better description, it's literally smeared across a multidimensional space with all the instances of itself. And the interaction between itself with all the instances of itself is what we utilize to do the quantum computation. So that's real, right? So it actually points to the idea that the many worlds interpretation is correct. And I was thinking about that, and I looked at the stoplight, and the way the light was changing from red to green, the scattering of the light, and I was also tired, so when I would go like this, the scattering of the light looked different in every color. And I understood, and I was like, wait a second, what? Is it possible to communicate with someone with the fringes of the light in between the dimensions somehow? And even though it was clear to me that there's so many different things that can be operative here, like, maybe the glass is a little different or sits different, who knows? But the second I thought that, there was like this strong sense inside of me, almost like somebody was telling me, yes. It was like, look there, look there. And I was like, whoa, like it was very strong. And I looked down in that instance, and there was the Department of Water and Power in America, they write like with a Sharpie on the floor, depending on what power lines go through the floor. And I saw one of these numbers. And what's funny is that it kind of looked on the left. I'm showing images of this in my first video that I put out on the subject. On the left of the first number, there was like this little circle and a line through it. And that circle and the line through it kind of looked like a dial on a editing software. So I thought, ooh, would it be hilarious if this number somehow solves my color problem that I couldn't fix for hours? And maybe it matches some kind of a LUT number that just fixes the color problem. But then I was like, just a fun thought, and I moved on. Obviously, I'm like, I'm not going to lose the war, the battle to insanity tonight. So I'm just going to keep going.
Sure.
But I had my sandwich, I had my Coke, and I go back, and I was walking on the other side of the street, and I'm looking at these numbers on the other side of the street, and I was like nobody's around, nobody's going to know. All right, I'm going to go take a picture of this. Who cares? So I go and I took a picture of this. I go back home. I put it in Spotlight. Now, this is important because every time I tell the story to people that are more scientifically minded and have some understanding of statistics, they kind of look at me and go, so what? But I think it's because they don't understand the specific detail here. I didn't put it in Google. I didn't put it in, on a Spotlight on a Mac. It basically searches through the computer and it searches through the web at the same time. I just put the numbers. It's random 6 numbers. And if you search through Spotlight, it would usually come up with some adjacent things, like even if it didn't come up with whatever you wanted. It came up with nothing aside from one hit. And that hit was not on my computer. It was one paper that it found on the web, put out by CERN, talking about searching for particles outside of the standard model a year after the discovery of the Higgs boson particle. And I was like,
that's weird.
Whoa. And it was right in that moment where I looked at that and I thought at the thing, and then the same feeling that hit me when I thought that hit me again. It's like, look. And I started reading the paper, and to be quite frank, I didn't see too many things in the paper that I could kind of immediately connect or anything like this, given it's like it's a full-on physics paper from CERN, so you got to be a physicist to truly understand the details. But I couldn't really, but then it sent me through this like weird rabbit hole, a little bit like Charlie Day in the basement, kind of connecting dots kind of vibe.
Sure.
But then, I don't know, I'm pretty grounded as a person. So I was like, okay, well, this is a fun game. So I just kept on playing it. And it took me another like 2 or 3 years in which things like this would happen. And by the way, I documented everything, because if I just tell you the story, it's kind of like, well, I don't know how much of this you made up. I don't know how much of this you can.
But other synchronicities.
Other synchronicities that I documented that are very, very solid. And eventually, after all of that, after I actually told this story to my now fiance, back then we just started dating. Luckily, she didn't leave me. And then I told her about this stuff, and then also the number 42 started following me everywhere, because the universe is not without a sense of humor. You guys probably know the number 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And then I told her all of this, and all of a sudden the number 42 started appearing around her too, in crazy ways. I'm not talking about on a digital clock, like in a crazy way. And actually, the day we figured out that it needs to be some kind of a laser, and we didn't know what it meant. We were in the botanical gardens in Colorado, and we started talking about why plants are the color they are, because they reject green. It's the one color they don't use for energy, so that's why they're green. And I was like, well, why are certain plants red? Is that because they reject red? And she knows a lot about plants, so she started explaining to me how photosynthesis works and all of that. And then I had the same feeling, just like I had when I looked at the light. Again, yes, look there. I was like, okay. And then we stepped outside. It was a very hot day. It was like 115 degrees in Fahrenheit. And I was calling a lift to go back to the hotel. She crosses the street to go stand in the shade under the only tree that was in the beginning of that street on the other side. She goes, she stands there. I call the lift. I cross the street. I hug her. And then I look down. And I was like, Kelsey, look down. And she was standing on 42, the same color that the numbers that I saw the first time where the light was. And I have a picture of this, that she's just dying laughing, like standing above this. That's 42. Weird. And so, but this was already at the tail end of many, many, many of these things. But that was wild. And then that day, she was like, okay, this is insane. So she's also a researcher, so she helped me like go through many papers quickly, and we went through like a bunch of things. And we actually together landed on this idea that it kept on repeating, 650 nanometers, 650 nanometers. It has to be diffracted, has to be coherent light, so laser, has to be all of these, has to be that. And then I was like, okay, well, I don't know what that means.
Where did that information come from?
It's hard to say. I'm actually now in the process of actually like figuring out what was the actual trajectory through some of the stuff that I saved. Because Aaron, the director, is asking me all these questions, like, well, just what you asked. I was like, okay, but how specifically you got to that?
Right.
So now I feel the obligation to explain. So that's what I'm in the process of doing. So,
gotcha.
But essentially, it's the way it works is you come up. Let's say, okay, so the methodology would not fly in any scientific, context. Just to be clear, but it's kind of a combination of very strong intuition, and then things that you do understand about the world. And then, if I understand that it's kind of telling me in this very insistent way of like, okay, look at this number, whatever it is, like random number. So I will Google this number, and this number will come up with some kind of a paper. That's why I meant like Charlie Day connecting dots, right?
Right.
This paper kind of talks about this other thing. And then you're looking for this one thing in the paper that gives you this strong intuition again. So the heart, right? And you're like, okay, this, what about it? I don't know. Okay. But then you go deeper and you kind of think about it. Okay, what does that mean? So it's very flimsy in terms of like, you can't submit this as a research paper. Nobody's going to accept this.
But
right?
if you trust your psychic hunch or your instinct and you're following that and it's leading you to answers, you just keep going.
Exactly. Right? Because there's something that it paid off with. It's the only reason why it's now being taken a little bit more seriously. But I would submit to you that this is what's happening to a lot of people. They just either trail off or don't follow it through, and then it doesn't land on anything that is functional. I happen to get really lucky and follow through with something that actually mapped onto something. So now there's a reason to understand that this way of searching for things actually works.
So you get to this, you work out how to use this laser. I want to just get to the actual symbols that you're seeing and talk about that, because I think that's the sort of the crux of the...
Yeah, the laser is super simple, and the truth is that it's kind of cool, lasers, but it's like a simple laser. So the discovery is the connection.
Like a laser pointer, the
laser pointer will not work. That's interesting.
Will not work.
No, and that's interesting because it has something to do. This is why now my working theory is that it has something to do with holography, with an actual hologram.
Okay.
So we are the hologram, and I think that what was happening is we're looking back at wherever we projected from. I think that's what's happening. So, and this is, by the way, not a crazy idea. This is a very mainstream physics idea, the holographic principle. Look it up. And so the laser, to be super clear, it's a super simple laser. It just has to be diffracted. And diffracted just means it has a diffracted lens on it that splits it the way that you see like in a supermarket when they scan barcodes. That's it. Okay.
So it's an X.
Either X or a band, doesn't matter.
Okay.
But what it allows you to do is to actually so the reason that matters is because the laser can actually also not just, and this is why holography I think is involved, is because it can also figure out a phase. And so the difference between a hologram and a regular snapshot of a camera is that a snapshot of a camera only captures things in 2D. It captures only the amplitude of the wave, and then depending on how much exposure it gets, you have the imprints of the, But with a hologram, you have another light source coming from the side that also maps on the phase, so how far the waves are and how. So you have a 3-dimensional image because you have 2 data points crossing each other, and that is mapped onto a surface. And then if you just remove the objects and you remove the source light, the reference light is enough to give you an illusion that there's something there, but very realistic one. Okay, so I landed on this idea. It was actually during COVID, so ironically, you could only get lasers in China. You couldn't get them anywhere. Nothing was available. So I had to order one, and I now know it wasn't a coincidence. I had to order. Usually you would just order a laser pointer and you're done, right? It will be there by tomorrow. You couldn't do that. So I had to order this one diode of a laser that you had to build a circuit for. So it kept on doing this like very, very, like a 80s movie, like Discovery kind of, scenario where, now you have to like solder the thing. And I knew nothing about soldering. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
So then I ordered it. It took like 3 months to get to me. Very melodramatic. 3 months to get to me. I built my fiance's dad is an engineer. I asked him like how to build a simple circuit. He showed me. I made a little circuit. I turned on the laser. I smoked DMT, and I was just like, "What?" I couldn't believe it because I never thought this would work. I just thought I'm playing a game, and let's play the game. Who cares? This is fun. But when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. At that point, you really have to consider like, okay, is this an actual schizophrenic outbreak?
Well, so describe what you saw, like show in the most clear terms.
So you see code. It's running. It's like digits. It kind of looks like in the movie. Kind of looks like Japanese katakana.
Yeah.
Mixed with some Hebrew letters and some regular numbers from 0 to 5. I'm saying all these things as approximations. It's not exactly like that. It's some kind of an alien language.
But it's a character-based system.
You're UFO people, so you would know. What is the name of this story that was going around with the one with the like a drone that the claim was that it was worked on in somewhere in the Bay Area? You know what I'm talking about?
A drone that was worked on in the Bay Area.
You for sure. I'm just not explaining it right. So there was some kind of a story about somebody exposing the fact that there was some kind of a UFO drone of some sort, and it was worked on. Hold on, I'll tell you what to Google. I think it's UFO. Let me see if I remember correctly. No. Well, yeah. If you do Bay Area, anyways, some of the people maybe here would know. But anyways. In the story, the claim is that somebody saying, look, I worked on this. He's anonymous, obviously. He's like, I don't want to come out as who I am, but this is real. And then he shows pictures of these like different parts of the supposedly drone, and there's language on it. That language.
Oh, yeah. There's been some characters that have been reported. Like Danny Sheehan has some stuff that he's written down that he saw in Blue Book. And the Roswell craft, there were what they described as hieroglyphs on some of the material inside the.
What I saw in these doesn't look like that. No.
Okay.
So specifically in that story that I'm telling you about, that looks almost identical to what you see in the laser, which is very interesting.
So now, you see these characters in using this experiment. You realize you have the aha moment, and you go, "Oh my God, this has all been leading to this," and then you have this moment. And you have to start showing other people to see if they're seeing it too, right? And so you begin showing people. And what happens then at that point? You start bringing other people into this.
I mean, at that point, everybody has the response that you see in the trailer.
Are they all seeing the same exact? Like, if they drew the characters, you would create like you could have an alphabet of the characters if each person
No,
went down.
because there's too much going on in any given point. But you can recreate kind of like what you see because there's just millions of them and they're moving very fast. You can see concretely that they're there, but it's too much information for your brain to focus and like be able to, But
it's not. In other words, it's not random. The symbols that you're seeing are the same. You see the same symbols repeated.
Yeah. People agree on what they are. Now, it is true that ultimately, in order to fully establish this, you're going to have to somehow either record directly from the cortex, with some advanced version of Neuralink or something. But they do have this technology where they can project your mind onto a screen now. It's rudimentary, but it exists. So to use something like that to fully establish it, obviously. But yeah, no, I had 15 people in the room at the same time, and they're just all looking at the same thing. We're talking about its behavior, where things are. It looks like it's moving in mostly three different axes, around these buckyballs. They kind of look like truncated icosahedrons that are made out of this code, and they're kind of rotating. And then there's these giant columns that are moving around. And then each and every one of the characters is also switching in its own spot, just like the old briefcases with the, that you have to punch in the code, is like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So this is all one complex sort of animated thing happening together in one thing, and then there's millions of those all flowing past.
Yep.
Wow.
It's enormous. It looks enormous, and then you realize it's everything, because when you shine the laser, you're like, oh shit, like it's everything.
And someone asked earlier in the chat, do the symbols change based on the surface that you are looking at? No,
that's the weird part. And this is an important point, because the most common email I get is that I see the code without the laser, or I see the code without the molecule. And usually when I drill down with people that say that, we discover it's not the same code. So they see something else. So there's different kinds of codes. One of the attributes of what people see without the laser is that they can kind of change it. They can do something with it, with their attention. They can ask it to be something else. With the laser, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you are, it's going to be what it is. And so far, not surface, not sound, not anything managed to change the code. And in fact, this is the thing that I'm focused on the most now, to figure out if is there anything that I can do to shift the code's behavior in such a way that we can all agree that it's happening in that way. Because if you can do that, not only you have another layer of confidence that you're interacting with something really real, but also you'll start be able to create a Rosetta Stone, a map of what it means in terms of reality. Because if I turn on a very powerful magnet and the code does X or Y, and both you and I agree that that's what happened, now we know quite a bit about magnetism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we can start asking, okay, so we know what the magnet does in terms of what we understand in physics. Look what the code does. So now we know that this behavior of the code related to this particular behavior.
It's not, in other words, it's not subjective. There's actual objective reality to that code.
It's not subjective even without anybody else telling you that. It's just that you see it, you immediately. So recently, Chase Hughes, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's kind of like a buddy language expert. He used to be an expert in interrogation. He worked for the government. He does a lot of things now. He's trending. He's been on Dr. Phil, and if they do a segment together. And he reached out to me, and he said, the reason I reached out to you is because I can smell bullshit from 10,000 miles away. That's what I do. Okay. I've never in my life seen so many people having such an authentic reaction to something. You can't fake that. That they're seeing something that impacts them very deeply. And I need to understand what's going on here. So that, and I always said that's a data point. Like when people see it, there's something about that is very impactful, because that's
what was so captivating about the trailer, is like you just see the realness of the reaction, and it's like boom, 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 each person, and the way they describe it, like it's in its own space. If you can move around it and see it as if it's floating in its own room.
Cognitive scientist has a word called Objectness. It's designed to denote the property of realness. It's basically how an object that is real in the space behaves with the full repertoire of all the attributes that it exhibits, including the way that ambient light interacts with it, which is very complex, by the way. This is why coming up with a very realistic virtual reality is so complicated and so difficult. and the code exhibits this objectness. A good example of what objectness is that people with synesthesia, they never confuse synesthetic colors with regular colors, because synesthetic colors are mind-made. They're just projected, overlaid, so to speak. But real colors have a different kind of feel because they're real. They have objectness.
So is this another data point in this? Like, I understand that Gallimore and I guess John Dean were, my understanding of their work was they were trying to figure out how to map hyperspace in a way, right?
This
like if
is
you
the whole
send,
project, the whole DMTX project, yeah.
So if you took 100 people and under laboratory conditions, you sent those people on a DMT sustained drip, like an anesthesiologist in a surgical setting, you could send them their consciousness directly to this place, and they could explore it for however much time they need, and then ideally come back and report back. And then if we had enough people doing this, we would be able to get sort of a common set of observables.
That's
right.
Exactly. Yep.
And do you feel like what you've discovered is another layer onto that conversation? Have you talked to any of these guys about what your work has revealed?
Yeah, I met with Gallimore. I met him in Japan, actually, and then recently he was on my podcast. And I met with John Dean in San Diego, and he knows about it. The wheels of academia and science, they do move slowly because of financial restrictions. So when you submit for a grant, like with John Dean, even if he really wants to put the laser in the thing, I don't know if he does. I would assume that there's no reason for him to not try. But you submitted one thing, you got the grant for it. That's what you got to do. You can't really change it too much. So that's why you have to kind of take it one step at a time. But I think it definitely lends itself really nicely to scientific investigation because it's so repeatable. It's so coherent. It doesn't change, or it doesn't care about what you're doing, so to speak, just like a real object would. So I think it lends itself really nicely to investigation. Even what they're doing in DMTX now in the Imperial College in London, what they've been doing for the last 2 years, they were focusing on trying to see if they can agree that people see similar entities. And I personally am on record of saying that even though I'm super happy that somebody's doing that, and especially very smart people are involved, so that's very encouraging to know that very serious people are taking this seriously. But I do think that actually focusing on entities is a little flimsy, because it's like there's too many changing parameters from a scientific standpoint. You can say, well, some of them might be archetypes. Somehow our brain is the same on some level. The reason that I feel the code is a little, it's actually lends itself nicer to an investigation like this is because you can do so many different things with it after people see it. And you can basically, because it's not just code, it's very specific code, and it has a very particular behavior. So there's also complexity there that you can talk about. And that is, I feel like, easier to agree on. And when you go to hyperspace and you focus on entities, to me, it kind of feels a little bit like if you go to New York and you've never been to Earth, and then you just grab a random person on the street and you ask them about the nature of reality. And they're like, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? It's like,
it depends on who you grab.
How do you know you
might get some really interesting answers.
It's like, it's like, yeah. So I think focusing on the space itself and its attributes is a much more scientific way of approaching it.
And more fruitful in your view. You
in my view, yeah. But I'm not the official scientist. And again, my head is down too, because truly, like you're talking about some of the most brilliant people on the planet. Like, there's no question about that.
Well, I think that's an interesting, again, that's where the UAP UFO world overlaps with this world, is that it seems like people find themselves, especially recently, more so on a quest to kind of really get at what is going on. Like, what is reality, and how are these beings that are supposedly appearing and disappearing and coming and going at will related to what people report when they have an NDE or a DMT experience. And it definitely seems like there's some commonalities across all of these different phenomena that seem to indicate that there is something else going on. There's just deeper level stuff happening here than what we can make out.
Let me actually use your expertise. I would love to ask you one question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what is the most robust current, because I really know nothing about it that much, what is the most current robust part of what people talk about the disclosure, aside from what the CIA released like a few years ago? Like, was there another statement that the government made or somebody made? Like,
what's the state of play right now with disclosure?
Yeah, like who said what recently that makes people like say, yeah, like the disclosure is coming? That's what I'm asking.
Oh, that's a spicy meatball. All right. Well, I'll do the rapid fire, and then if I miss anything, Xander, please just jump in and help me out. 2017 is the beginning, the period that kicks off the current era in ufology. And ufology can be broken down into ancient history to 1947 Roswell, 1947 all the way to now, or 2017. And then in 2017 to present day, we're in this new thing. What happened in 2017, of course, we had the New York Times article by Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenthal, Glowing Auras and Black Money. The Tic Tac Go Fast gimbal videos leaked, and those were the first videos that were officially put out by the Defense Department and that we knew were real. So we had multiple sensor systems verifying the video that we had, and everything was observed by this whole battle group, and it was just recorded. So that set the stage. And then from there, we've had Elizondo, David Grush come forward and say that there are craft that we have in our possession. We have bodies, we have physical craft. Some of them are intact. Since then, a number of other people have come forward saying things like, and these are people who are credible, in a position to know. One claim was that we have gained access to the inside of at least one of these craft. We were able to cut our way through into it and actually get inside. Of course, there's the Bob Lazar story. But lately, it's gotten really hot because the conversation has turned to some kind of an impending event that's supposed to take place in the near future. And it's coming from people like Colonel Carl Nell, who is saying that we have to complete disclosure by a certain date or things are going to be catastrophic. Something is going to happen that they won't be able to control. So there's an organized plan of disclosure that has to proceed at a certain pace. Lou Elizondo has come back out and backed that up a little bit by strongly implying that something big is about to happen and we need to prepare for it. Just as recently as 2 weeks ago, the head of the New Paradigm Institute, Danny Sheehan, who's a really well-known figure in ufology and an attorney and a civil rights hero, who's represented all of these whistleblowers at one point or another, more or less, he's came forward and said that there's going to be some kind of an intervention, that we're going to have contact, some kind of open contact event is going to take place, and that they know this, and that this is imminent, and that we've got to start getting ready for it. Because people are going to just be like rocked when it happens. So that's where we're at today. And we're all just kind of trying to figure out what happens next, what comes next.
That's interesting.
Did I miss anything, Xander? What do you think?
The only thing I'd add is that I guess the last couple years especially has really been characterized by it's almost the community getting smart. So the community is really vetting its whistleblowers at this point. And we've got some really top-class journalists. We've got Ross Coulthart, we've got Jeremy Corbell, Michael Schellenberger. These guys know what they're doing. They're seasoned journalists, and the whistleblowers that they're interviewing, they are vetting to like insanely high standards, to the point where these same whistleblowers are talking to Congress in classified settings. So basically, the standard of evidence that we're getting now is essentially irrefutable. It's just why the community keeps saying disclosure has already happened, because the people that we know have said that this is real. Lou Elizondo, we've got David Grush. They were both in positions that we've verified. Even the Pentagon has verified that this is the case. They've testified before Congress, or at least David Grush has. I don't know whether Lou Elizondo has or will, but they've testified under oath that this is real, it's happening, and everything that they've said has been cleared by DOPSA. So it's not just that you could say maybe they're not even whistleblowers, because they are saying stuff that has been approved to be released. But, what they're saying is...
It feels kind of orchestrated. Like this is like they got the green light on some of this stuff.
I mean, they got the green light on everything. Lou Elizondo had to have his book with Dopsa for months.
But they still they're holding some stuff back. I mean, the book doesn't go...
They're holding so much stuff back, in my opinion, at this point. We've not heard from Grush in a little while. I'm sure we'll hear from him soon. But that's my takeaway from the last 2 years, is that the quality of our whistleblowers in particular is at this point, it's irrefutable, and disclosure at this point has happened. We've just not seen the stuff that all of us want to see, which is, the crafts in 4K, and they want to see beings, and realistically, the powers that be that don't want this information to come out, they're just waiting for AI to be good enough so that it can muddy the waters immediately, which I'm sure it will be able to do in the next year. AI will be able to make authentic UAP videos. We can probably do it now, and that's what's so sad. Is it won't take an authentic video on Reddit now means nothing. It's going to get torn apart. Going to get torn apart immediately. But it's the whistleblowers. It's the people that have seen the nuts and bolts of it all. That's the big difference, and the fact that it's getting talked about in hearings. That's the biggest thing for me, anyway. I don't know if you have any added thoughts to that, Clint.
I think you said it. I think it's the quality of the whistleblowers, the quality of the messengers now. It's just beyond. It's beyond anything that any previous standard you would have had. They're so high level, and the things that they're saying are so astonishing that it's like, okay, well, pick any of it. Like 10, if only 10% of it's true. You don't even have to have it all be true. Just 10% would be enough.
Yeah,
to change everything.
An interaction with Eric Weinstein on X back then. I think it was still Twitter, where somebody, he was like approached a few times, him and Sam Harris, and then eventually only he kept on being approached. And then there was an interaction I saw of him on Twitter back then, and he said, "I was informed, and I understand the reason for the secrecy now." And somebody asked him in the comments,
Eric Weinstein said this?
Yeah. Well, at least that's what I saw on the thread. I don't know if somebody faked the thread, but I definitely saw it on Instagram. There was like a thread with him. I should probably find out if it was a real thread, but it seemed to have been real. Maybe you guys can find it. And he basically, in that thread, somebody asked him, "Do you think we'll know in our lifetime?" And his response was, "Oh, yeah, you're definitely not going to have to wait that long."
That's really interesting because Xander, you just sent me a couple of clips. Xander's been working on some music, a music project, and we've been going back and forth on video clips that could pair well with this. You sent me some stuff yesterday, and in those clips it's George Bush and Barack Obama talking about, they're being asked on Jimmy Kimmel about UFOs. And I noticed something yesterday that I had never seen before, and it just leaped out at me, and it was so obvious. If you go back and watch those clips right now, in addition to all of the other people, like now that you've seen Carl Nell and all these other people come forward, and we have this framework, go back and watch those early clips of George Bush and Barack Obama. And what's funny about those two is W. Bush is always in character as like that guy. He's like, "I'm George Bush. You could have a beer with me. I'm super." They're always like jolly and relaxed to be on Jimmy Kimmel. There's like a jovial energy there. And when he asks about aliens and UFOs, and he goes, "Are you ever going to tell us?" You can see it in George Bush's face. He gets super, super serious. All that goes away, and he goes, "No, I'm not. I won't ever tell that." And Barack Obama, same thing. He gets super serious. All that funny energy, all that like vibe just goes away, and he gets like Iceman, and he's like, "No, I can't tell you." And I think, oh man, we've heard recently about, there's so much juice behind this idea that something huge is about to happen, and it could happen any minute. It could happen next year. It could be 5 years. It could be 5 months. But it feels like, to Xander's point, I'm starting to get the sense that this is what we're seeing is a controlled disclosure playing itself out. It's orchestrated, it's organized, it's orderly, and it seems disorderly, but that's kind of an illusion. The people coming forward are doing so in step with each other. They're saying the same things. They're stepping the message up month by month. You can see it now. Danny Sheehan just did on another podcast appearance where he repeated what he said. He's like, there's going to be an intervention. We need to prepare our people. The Vatican needs to get out ahead of this thing. The Vatican needs to make a statement. We saw it on Simon Holland's channel. Just today, he put out a video. It was just about 8-9 hours before we went live today. It went up, and he said probably next year, ESA is going to make an announcement that they've isolated a signal, and that this through Breakthrough Listen. There's been some back and forth drama on this. We were going to talk about it today, but we didn't really go there. But he repeated it at the end of today's video. He's like, probably next year. They're sitting on this. And Lou Elizondo said in a very recent podcast interview just the other day, he said, again, when asked, what is coming? What do you know? What is coming? Is it related to this asteroid that's supposed to come close to the Earth? He goes, no, has nothing to do with that. And I can't talk about it. It's something that someone else is going to have to talk about. I'm not prepared to make a statement.
Is that on the podcast when he said that if people would know, they would turn back to religion?
That was an earlier state. So he's made a bunch of these murky statements, and they're kind of just sort of, I don't know how else to put it. It's just sort of like a tease. It's like, well, what?
Well, it's not. I would say it's not a tease. I actually can comment a little bit about that. So it's very much along the lines of what I'm seeing, and all I can tell you is that it's another really great Terence McKenna quote was, people spend their lives looking for the thing, never spending one moment thinking what they're going to do if they actually find out what the thing is. And
that's heavy.
Yeah. So the living under the banner of we're going to discover is an exciting element of the thing, but depending on the actual content of what you find out, that can put a lot of different kinds of emphases on what's going on. And it actually goes back to the original question you asked me, like, how does it feel to know? So now that we went through all the steps of explaining what DMT is and all that stuff, usually the answers to questions they can answer, it's like a very rapid hot cold game with your conjectures. So you would come up with a concept, like, wait, you want to tell me that? And before you even begin to postulate that question, they already know what you want. So they just nudge you. There's yes or no, yes, no, no. And it's like very quick. It achieves a few things. One of them, you don't freak out because you already thought of everything. So it's just a yes or no game. And so you postulated it. But if they need to give you an understanding of a deeper flavor, they kind of hand you the understanding. You just know now. I know.
Yeah, it's like a knowingness. You get that. It's like that attachment in an email. You click it, and it's like, and you just get that full brain download.
Exactly.
Yep.
Pure meaning, no symbols, right?
Yep.
And the way they showed me is that because I asked for a long time, and then there was no answer. Every time it was like, whoa, not enough DMT, bye, like, something like that. And then after maybe a couple of years that I was asking this question consecutively, one time I smoked a bunch of it, and nothing happened in the beginning. I was confused, but then I got this sense of like, just keep going. And I was like, okay. So then I smoked more and I smoked more. I was standing on my balcony and I was in front of the mountains. And I wasn't high, but all of a sudden these literally like SETI satellite dishes came out in between the trees in the mountains. And they were as real as real dishes, like just rose. And they were made out of this gray material with these weird numbers on them, which is very similar to what you kind of see in the
Where were you when this happened?
At home. I was just in front of, I live in LA, in Pasadena, so I was right in front of the mountains.
And you'd never seen these dishes before?
No, I've never seen anything like this. And it just like rose, and it was after they told me like, keep smoking. So it's almost like you need to load up. Like, we need juice for this. So I was like, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So then the thing arises, and I'm kind of looking at it, and I'm not high at all. Like I don't feel like I'm going anywhere. And all of a sudden, the whole place was stripped to the grid, just like in Tron. Just, and then I saw something that I could recognize, but I couldn't really understand what it was. But on the bottom of my street, there was something that it took me a few seconds to understand what it was. But then I realized it was the entire other side of the street, the other side of the block, upside down, literally upside down, sitting on some kind of almost like an assembly line arm. And then the whole thing just went, just landed on the other side of the street.
Like Inception?
Literally. And the whole thing just started reforming. And I saw cars appear out of nowhere, people appear out of nowhere, just like, and it kept on going in zigzags like this. And it kept on doing this until it got closer and closer to me, and eventually just went. And I was like, and then it was just silence. And they just almost like they stood back and like, okay.
Does he know what we just showed him? Does he get it?
Not does he know. It was like, okay, now watch him. Like, how does he react? Because I think that's the reason they don't tell you, because it's like, it's an impact. Right.
So what are you describing here? What are you saying? You saw this vision.
They straight up showed that this is simulated, like for sure. And then in that moment, there is this gut punch, because it does make you feel a little insignificant and puppet-like. I later realized that that's a misplaced sentiment, because it's not the truth. The truth is that even though there are simulated layers, they're not real. They're real because you're experiencing them. So if you stub your toe, it hurts. That's real. Okay.
You make it real by the virtue of experiencing it. It becomes
real. It's real, full stop. There's no, right. You make it real. It's like this whole idea of like, well, your mind is, but it's Maya. It's like, no, it's not. If it hurts, it's real.
Right.
So now, or if you feel something, it's real. And that's an important component of it. The reason I told you the story is because this heaviness that you see on these people's faces when they have to talk about it, if they know the thing, is because the true frame of what's going on, it's beyond not just us, but beyond them as well. There's enormous structures that are kind of deciding the fate of everything. And they have their reasons. And this is why I'm making this distinction between kind of talking about it as a maybe and then knowing something for sure, is because the second you start understanding the real thing, very quickly what you start realizing that what truly matters to you and should matter to you is the same thing that the Buddha taught, which is it's right here, right now. It's the only thing that you will ever be in contact with in any real sense. And not only that, it's the only thing you should want to aim to be in contact with. Because anything beyond that, as entertaining as it might be, there's certain levels of emergence and occurrences that you simply you can't handle. It's beyond your ability of what you are to handle.
It's been called the indigestible truth about UFOs. That's what they call it. They say the truth is indigestible. That's coming from a CIA guy named Jim Simivan who said that.
So that's very correct. But I think the deepest seed of understanding here is that all of it is out there. All of it. So you want to live your best life. You want to aim towards the thing you know is good. Because you don't need to prepare anything, because it's outside of your ability to prepare. Prepare for what? So there's nothing you can prepare aside being exactly where you are and feeling equanimity and peace. Now, it takes some doing to snatch ourselves back from the modern world where everything is glowing and shiny and entertaining to that. And this is actually the only, if I have to give one I think, piece of advice for whatever it is that's coming is that just as much as you can, focus on your loved ones, focus on your kids, focus on yourself and how you feel. Because to all the people that, there's all these claims from all these different directions, from UFOs to spiritual people, that I saw somebody commenting that her daughter is now seeing orbs. All of these things are real. The reason that this is happening is because we're waking up to a much larger reality, and part of it is going to be exposure to the grander thing, which the only way to really come to terms with it is to realize that unless you can be happy right now, and that's your choice, that's a choice. It has nothing to do with external circumstances. You won't be happy in 5D. You won't be happy in 8D. More content doesn't make you happy.
I see what you mean.
So it's
you have to get your mind right in the moment, in the nowness.
The only thing that matters. It's the only real value. And I understand that from the perspective of many people who this is their philosopher's stone to find out. The lesson is actually that you always had it. This is it. And it sounds a little trite and maybe a little disappointing because, of course, we've heard this before. But I think the emphasis is different because we are actually going to experience it.
When you say that, though, what do you mean? We're going to actually experience it. Do you think is it your sense that these beings, when we're talking about the UFOs specifically, UAPs, the craft, that they have awareness of this deeper level of reality and they have the ability to traverse it at will?
They understand more, but it's much bigger than them as well.
It continues to go bigger.
It's outside of their hands as well. It's almost like the system doesn't care. The system just is what it is.
So your sense is that there is a mega event of some kind impending, but it's bigger. It's not just a UFO thing. It's something larger than that.
I think it already happened. I think we're just living the unfolding of the understanding of it. That's it.
When you say it already happened, are you describing something like what people like the Mandela effect, where we jump timelines, or we somehow manage to arrive?
I understand what you're saying. Not that complex. So essentially, what happens in higher spaces, it then reverberates through the layers, and it expresses itself in what it is.
As above, so below.
The event already happened.
Right.
Yeah. So it's no and this is why when I hear, and I don't know what they know. I'm not. I don't know what Barack Obama knows. I don't know what the UFO people know. I don't know what they actually know. I do know this, that is irrefutably true. No matter what the truth is, and I've just experienced little portions of the bigger thing, and I understand the kind of the impact of it to some degree. And I learned that the only way that I could fold it into my day-to-day and then still operate and be happy is shift the emphasis from all of that to me right here and what I do and how I impact people, how people feel when I leave the room, how I lead my life. Do I cheat? Do I steal? How does that make me feel? Do I care? Because sometimes the problem is you just don't care. Right. And that's something to rectify all by itself, because that's the seed of all the other problems, right? So these things, it's almost like we are the tools. We are that AGI that we're afraid of. We are it. It's just that, so instead of figuring out how to check this imaginary thing that we don't even know how it's going to come about, we have to check ourselves.
Start there.
Well, it's the only thing you can ever influence. And again, right. I get it. I'm not saying anything new. And I'm not trying to preach. I'm just saying that from my experience, when you get any glimpses of the bigger thing of any kind, it's so clear. It's crystal clear that, well, just imagine for a second. Just you go, okay, let's imagine a scenario. We're all ascending to the 8th dimension. Wow, everything is colors and beautiful and blah, 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 all this craziness. But very quickly, it's just going to become like all the other things that you got used to, like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're still miserable. So it makes no difference.
Right back to where you started.
It's like, okay, what else is there to find out? When's the next disclosure?
Right. What's the next level? Yeah.
It's
I
just
think,
this.
I think, well, going back to the documentary, what is the status of it right now, this project, and how far do you have to go before it's ready to for prime time?
It depends on budget. If we can focus on it full time, probably 4 to 5 months, we can finalize it. 4 6 months. If because both me and Aaron are in the movie industry, we just have the ability to do that for relatively very cheap. So we do it when we can. That's just going to stretch for a longer period of time. But it sounds from what you're saying and from what I'm saying, we might not have that long. So
maybe not.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say we would aim towards about maybe 5 or 6 months or so.
And for people who want to help out in any way they can, what I understand that that you're raising funds to complete this film. Is that true? They can go and,
Yeah,
and donate.
if anybody would like and can donate, please do. We have a GoFundMe campaign. If you link the trailer, it's in the trailer's description, so you can see it there. And I think it's also mentioned on my channel in general. So my YouTube channel is Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts.
Dango Thoughts, and then on the actual page where the trailer is, they can link.
It's just right on the bottom, because that's the first thing that we have some potential like private investors right now, but at the moment we're relying more on the GoFundMe, which actually helps tremendously. We had a good friend who put in some cash in the beginning, which we were deeply grateful for. Kevin, you're amazing. And beyond that, we're kind of relying on public funds at the moment.
It's very exciting stuff. I can't wait to see the whole thing. The trailer is a it's like a mind melt. I can't, every time I watch it, I'm just like, what is it they're seeing? I really am excited to dive into this a little bit more and learn more about what's going on here. Do you have any, so 5 to 6 months, if you guys can get the funding together, is there anything else that you want to say that we haven't covered? Anything else we haven't discussed?
No, that was it. I mean, I think it's funny because the UFO thing is something that I asked Aaron about this, the director. And by the way, I have to mention him. Aaron Venden is incredible. He's just, what you saw that trailer, he whipped it off and whipped it out in like a week.
Oh, wow.
He did this in the beginning. We didn't release it for a long time because we didn't know the legal stuff. But so I'm very excited about what he's going to create. And we spoke a little bit about this UFO thing. Like, are we touching this subject, right? And Aaron said, like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if I want to pull this thread because it's like a whole. So the truth is that we're not against it. It's just that I guess I need to dive deeper into what's truly there, because all of these things that you mentioned, we already know them, right? Like the disclosures that people went in front of Congress and Lou Elizondo and everything they said. So this is all public knowledge at this point. So we want to bring something that people don't quite know yet. And we also want to connect it to something more tangible, because we want people to leave the film understand that they're truly involved, like they're actually part of whatever's going on. That, yes, my story is somewhat interesting because of it's so unorthodox, but outside of that, we definitely trying to bring the understanding that if we are becoming more, and I know that I saw some of the comments, I saw some of the listeners that were commenting these things. I was very, kind of like, I don't know about this stuff, like orbs of light, all that stuff. But I've now, without a shadow of a doubt, I know that these things are real. And by the way, funny enough, somebody mentioned James Gates. I don't know if you guys know, but James Gates himself is famous on record saying that even though, he found these adinkras and error correcting codes, he does not think it means we're dealing with a simulation. That's important to mention. He thinks it's actually much crazier than that. Like, and I actually agree with him, because the true nature of it is much more. And what's funny is that he's on record as saying, like, well, if it was a simulation, we would see ghosts. Actually,
I saw that. His reasoning on that didn't really make sense, though. Yeah,
no, like, it does make sense. There would be some informational traces from a technical standpoint. It does make sense, but
people see ghosts all the time.
Exactly. That's the point. That's the part that kind of gets me, because it's just like you closing a whole side of human experience, because that's not how we decided to look at it from the current scientific perspective. I think science needs to also open their minds. So I think we covered a lot. I want to use this opportunity to actually thank you. I had a great time. This is a very pleasant conversation. And actually, I'll take this as a sign, because that's your guys' main subject matter, to maybe dive a little deep. I might actually pick your brain a little bit. I'll go back and forth with you also in the private to see if I can gather some information that I'm not aware of that might be relevant and worth considering talking about. So,
well, I would love to have you back anytime, and if you want to just talk UFOs, we'll bring you back on, and we can. In fact, we're going to move on to some stories from the last week before we wrap up for today. So, if you stick around for a little bit, we can.
I'll
we can check into that.
Yeah,
but I definitely think it would be a good sequel. It's probably too big to add into the current project. You know, the UFO thing.
That's a 4-hour documentary, right?
That's a 4-hour David Lynch movie right there.
Oh, one final thing about UFOs, so your audience might find this interesting. One of the things I realized by talking about all this stuff and some of the stuff I gathered recently is that I think that and especially because of that story with the little craft with the language on it, I think that the reason that they had such a hard time deciphering what to do with them in the Bob Lazar story and all the other thing in Area 51 is because I think that what's going on is that the code is so sophisticated that when you instantiate it in any environment that is designed to be both run on and obey that code, it's not like you put it into a prompter and then send the command down the chain all the way to logic gates and somehow something happens at the end. It's so sophisticated that it is the way it appears is actually codes for the functionalities in the space. So what this means is that if you have like a big craft, right, and you put it even in the right conditions under which it's supposed to be operating, unless you put the exact symbols at the exact correct sequence on it, like literally even write it with a Sharpie, it won't do what it's supposed to do. So it's literally waiting for the code to be on it to go, oh, now we're working. Now we're doing this thing.
That's fascinating. We'll have to come back and talk about that some more. We are out of time for today, but this has been a fascinating conversation, Danny. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain the project and just go into some detail about it, because I know people they saw it and they just didn't know what to make of it. It's almost too big to believe.
Thank you, Clint. I appreciate you. And thank you, Xander, for creating the connections and for everything. I appreciate you guys.
All right. Thanks, Danny. So we've got a few minutes left. We wanted to get into some stories from last week, and I think Xander, you had a clip queued up from Lou. Did you not?
Which one are you talking about?
Did you want to go to the Elizondo podcast clip where he talks about the message or the event?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to follow that up with the Simon Holland quote too, because I think they dovetail nicely into each other.
Okay, so this is the first clip. So Lou was on a live Q&A. I don't know when it was. Was it today or yesterday? I only saw it today. Essentially, he got asked about his comments about, we don't have a lot of time, and yeah, this was his response. I'll just go ahead and play it.
Does this event have anything to do with this asteroid Apophis scheduled very narrowly to miss our planet in 2027?
Negative. It has nothing to do with the asteroid Apophis and its approach to Earth. It has to do with something else potentially, which I'm not prepared to go into conversation right now.
Understood. And I know naturally a lot of people would be curious on that note. Is there anything you'd want to expand on that when it comes to 2027?
I'm gonna not 2027, but there may have been some other dates proposed, but I'm gonna let the experts noodle on that and figure that out. It's certainly too premature for me to say anything one way or the other, because we simply don't have enough data. So I'm just gonna do a polite pass.
This one's from Bodie Fuller.
What do you make of that, Xander?
It's his edge play, as always.
It's true. We don't have enough data. I'm going to let the experts noodle on that.
He obviously has some sort of information that we've not been told about. And it alludes potentially to what Sheehan's been saying about in his interview, in his speech at Yale. There's nothing to make of it at this point, in my opinion. I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that.
I feel like that statement, I don't have enough data, I'm going to let the experts noodle on that, or there's not enough data. That's interesting because what Simon Holland said in his video that came out today, do you have that video queued up? I sent you one with a timestamp.
Yeah, I got that.
It was like 5 minutes in towards the end of it was the last 2 minutes of the video. He says something really interesting. Yeah. So it's towards we can start it here, but what he has to say, the interesting bit is like the last 30 seconds, but this is the setup for that. So maybe we start here and then just...
Michael got you ignored. So thanks to Astron, an enormous global radio telescope organization, somebody wrote to me and said, they don't exist. Well, Google? Astron in the Netherlands built this amazing telescope. It's called LOFAR, the Low Frequency Array. LOFAR. It has the unique world ability to pick up very low frequency radio signals from the early universe, actually before light existed. It's brilliant, but its second claim to fame is that it's phased array. These antennas don't move, they can electronically steer them to take surveys all over the sky. Now that concept grew throughout Europe, and now the LOFAR network looks like this everywhere from Britain to Germany to France and the Netherlands. And from the early days of building LOFAR and networking all these other countries' low frequency arrays together, Astrom developed this multiplexing of radio telescope systems, which was the precursor of the world's best telescope, which is called SKA, the Square Kilometre Array. And Breakthrough Listen are using that today to still look for candidates of technological signatures, thanks to Astrom. Hang on, none of what I've just said was in John's video. Why? So the networking capabilities, the low frequency capabilities, and very much the phased array steering capabilities is the best tool to find a technological signature. That's what's happening today. LOFAR, in fact, is being rebuilt in the Netherlands, and that network in Europe is being upgraded because we want more information about ET and our universe. And remember, naysayers, I personally interviewed Dr. Andrew Simeon, principal investigator at Breakthrough Listen, who says BLC-1 is still of interest and there are other targets. And new telescopes, such as the Square Kilometre Array and how it's networked together, mentioning Astron, that he is actually associated with, is the way that we, in 2024, will hopefully find and confirm an extraterrestrial technological signature. World governments and religions are gearing up for that revelation. So that's the real story. We as humans are on the cusp of an amazing story because the truth is out there.
I think you're muted, Clint.
There we go.
There you go.
So that's an interesting, that dovetails nicely off of what Lou had to say, that it's almost, and Danny has talked about this, the Vatican's been preparing to make announcements. They've been getting their ducks in a row. I don't know. What do you think? Do you see a link there, or am I just connecting dots that
I think he's being very cautious because obviously Simon's made the news a little bit over the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
He's mentioned that he's alluded to the fact that he's got inside knowledge of an announcement of a technological signature. I don't see that in this video. I don't see the I know and you don't. I think he's dancing quite carefully and in a smart way around the fact that they're upgrading these phaser arrays or whatever he said. It's difficult. I think governments have always been trying to prepare for the unexpected. But I would I mean, you know Simon. I don't know Simon. I've never met him. But my key question would be more along the lines of what do you know? What have you been told? Because, he's said things about faster than light communication. He's talked about, they're preparing the announcement. I want to know what he knows beyond the published releases about upgrading telescopes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I the sense that I have, and this is only because like other channels have reported, like Dr. Becky's channel on YouTube has, she's talked about it. A few other people have been talking about this. Angry Astronaut just put out a video about 3 days ago about this. It sounds like that's it. It sounds like what it is. Like if you put Danny Sheehan off to the side for a second, you just look at what they're talking about. It sounds like they found something. They're not ready to say it out loud, but they are tripling down on their data, and they are all comparing notes, and there's a race on to figure out like who's going to be the first to make the announcement and how sure are they so that they don't fall flat on their face when they make it. That, if that's what it is, then what Lou just said makes a lot of more sense. Like, I'm not the expert. It's not 2027. I'm going to let the experts work on that. We don't have the data. It sounds to me like they've got some data. They're trying to confirm it. And then there's such high confidence that some kind of an announcement is coming. If it was just an announcement, like we found a signal. Well, we found a signal. I think the Angry Astronaut video was saying that their candidate was like 4 light years from here. 4 light years.
It's not far.
We can send messages back and forth. We can send data packs back and forth. It's 4 years between messages, but you could start to like communicate with another civilization if it was that close. That would be big enough. That would be huge. That would be a world-changing moment. It's not as big as open contact with ships appearing everywhere, but it's probably the next best thing. It's better than a biosignature. A techno-signature is like, oh shit, now we're talking.
So is it the same scenario? That's what I'm trying to get at. Is Simon talking? I mean, we think. I assume you think. I think that that NHI are here already. I think that's a separate story, and I think that's information that if anyone was to know, then people like Lou and Danny Sheehan are the people that know that. So what news is it to them that there's a techno-signature 4 light years away? Yeah, absolutely, that's in our cosmic backyard, 100%. But is it really relevant to the conversation that they're having and the conversation that the whistleblowers are having in Congress about already having this technology here? It's not 4 light years away. It's here in the US.
It's off Baja, off the coast.
Yeah, it's off Baja. Also news.
That's an interesting point, and I think you're right. Like, are we talking about 2 different things, or are we talking about one thing that is related across these conversations? And maybe, this is all speculation, but one piece of speculation that keeps coming up is they're warming us up. They're going to warm us up. You can't just say, oh, we've got the ships are all here, and if they appear in the sky all of a sudden at one day at the same time all over the globe, then that's mass hysteria. That's going to freak people out. But if you start by saying, we found a signal, don't worry, it's just a signal. We're looking at it. We're starting to work on it. We're decoding it. We're figuring out we can respond. We're going to, but we have time. This is not something that's immediate. It's not happening today, but it's big news. That gives people time to take that on board and kind of warm up to the thought of, okay, it's a signal. So they're advanced. We can talk to them. I could see that as being a step towards the bigger disclosure of they're here. But maybe, that's assuming they're related and this is a step-by-step process and they're trying to warm us up for something really big. And that's a big leap I'm making, but I don't know if that's the case.
So I think what you're getting at could this be a coordinated thing? I would struggle to connect that purely because
too many people involved.
The news that life exists elsewhere I don't think that'd be a shock to anyone. Even 4 light years away, nobody on Earth with conventional travel is ever going to see anybody from there.
Unless they can come here.
Yeah, I'd struggle to see a coordinated effort there. I think that the stories are too different. When we go back to Lou on Theories of Everything, talking about the idea that we were taught one thing and the reality is something completely different, and we would feel somber. That's 100% something completely different, and I think that is more related to what Lou said yesterday/today, whenever he said it. That's more related than what Simon Holland is currently saying.
It's like trying to grab steam. You're trying to just we're piecing together ideas of what we think people mean. I think you're right there. That's a great point. Somber is definitely heavier than we just found a civilization. It's weird. There's levels, right? There's we found microbes on a moon. We found some algae at the bottom of a crater someplace. That's not very fun. But we found a signal, and we can send a signal back, and we can start talking. It's 4 years between messages, but we can do that. That's hugely exciting. But they're already here is that's the meme where your head explodes and there's light shooting out of your eyes. And
I mean, ultimately, we believe that they're already here. We don't believe that we're in the dark and we've just found a light elsewhere. I don't believe that.
Do you have that? There was a Danny Sheehan interview clip that was 3 minutes long. Do you have that one on your end? I think it's one of the ones I sent you in the messages. There were 3.
I've got Simon Holland. I don't have a Sheehan link from you.
I think, just to sum that one up.
If you have it, I can share it.
It was basically him just kind of repeating what he'd said before. I think it's here. Hang on a second. Oh, here it is. Julian Dory's podcast. 3 minutes. I think we can do it in 3 minutes. Kind of running out of time, but let me just send this over real quick. Here we go.
You can just share screen, and I'll put it up.
Fair enough. Let's do. This is a Safari. I gotta share it on Chrome. Okay, here
Safari.
We go.
Old school.
I love Safari. What's wrong with Safari?
Everything.
Everything's wrong. Chrome tab. Here we go. Julian Dory podcast.
We have to find some issue that the people feel strongly enough. We have to find some issue that the people feel strongly enough.
Wait,
It's a great clip.
I'm freezing. Try one more time. Third time's the charm.
The people feel strongly enough about, so that they rise up, and that they say that we're not going to stand for this anymore. And that they have, that's the issue here with the UFO issue. We believe that there's an issue that the people suspect that this is such profound importance for the whole human family, that all across the political spectrum, people are saying, wait a second now. Are you telling us that you're in possession of an extraterrestrial, non-human origin spacecraft in the bodies of extraterrestrial beings that are non-human beings piloting these spacecraft, and you're just keeping this a secret from us?
Crazy.
Well, because you think somehow we're not mature enough to know about this? What's going on here? If we can get people to follow up on what's going on here, we may have an issue here that is broad-based enough for people to feel strongly enough about it to say, this is an outrage.
Yeah.
That you're keeping this information from us. And when you keep saying, there's going to be this catastrophic event, if we tell you about this, you say, like what? And they keep saying, we can't tell you, because, it's national security.
It's like you're back in the judge's chambers again in 72.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. They do the exact same thing all the time. And it just turns out I happen to have the continuity of experience.
That you do.
Of having lived through it. Over and over again, to say, look at, don't try to give us this again. You've done this before, and it didn't. I mean, from their perspective, it was a tragedy to lose the Vietnam War, And there was no doubt that the publication of the 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers contributed to them having to withdraw their troops out of Southeast Asia.
They did it to themselves.
Yeah, well, sure they did.
They did
And
to
they always do. They've done it to themselves. They've got themselves painted into a corner, and then they're going to try to blame us for it. You know. So what we're saying is that we have this particular opportunity with this particular subject, and it's not coincidental that I happen to be the lawyer that is here, drafting the legislation in part for the Congress to say, here's how you do it. If you want to get at this thing, this is how you do it. And so it's not that they can't figure out what to do. And we've crafted this 64-page bill, which we'll get into, that has set forth an entire procedure by means of which we can, in a sound and responsible way, roll out this information to the American public and to the people of the world, and give ourselves time to adjust our economic structures, our geopolitical structures, our religious institutions, et cetera, to try to accommodate this kind of huge expansion of knowledge about our place in the universe, actually, and have a soft landing here. The problem is that the people in positions of power and authority aren't convinced that they'll end up still being in power.
Right. Yeah, that's always the
that's
issue.
a catastrophe to them.
Sure.
Soft landing. I don't know. I just, it's like he keeps teeing it up. Like, we need a soft landing. We got to prepare people. We need to get people ready for this. We need to get this information out. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, but it definitely feels like there's a coordinated push to start putting this stuff forward. The Carl Nell clip that came out on Disclosure Day, where he was talking about all the reasons that this is real, which we don't have time to get into today. That's my takeaway.
Probably as a last point on this, Sheehan makes a very rational and calm explanation as to how we can get what we want, which is disclosure. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the government and the people in private industry have to play ball. And we even saw it today. It was the first time I saw it. Today was the UAP hearings that are supposed to be happening on November 13th, is it? Mm-hmm. They're now in jeopardy. So, the goals of private industry and those in the know have to align with what we want. And so far, I don't see evidence that their goals align with ours whatsoever. They know the truth, apparently, and we don't. And it doesn't matter that we don't know the truth to them. And I see no evidence that our knowledge of the facts matters to them in the slightest. We've had, what is his name, Mike Turner, who's from Ohio. Top donors are Raytheon and Lockheed. He's in lockstep with the Pentagon to get the hearings on November 13th/14th. I can't remember the date. He's trying to get them shut down, and it wouldn't surprise me if they win that. And he's doing it citing national security. And that's just evidence to me that he's not in lockstep. He doesn't necessarily care what we want as a populace.
That's where I have the biggest
donors.
problem. Yeah, these guys. Look at they're quite a pair.
Quite a pair. Handsome bunch.
A handsome bunch. Michael R. Turner, and look at the amounts of money here. Look. It's not a lot of money. It is, but it isn't. You know what I mean?
It's
like
enough. It's enough money.
$186,000. That's not. You can't buy a house for that. $114,000, $95,000, $121,000. What's he getting on the back end? That's what I want to know. Boeing.
Or what do they have on him that he doesn't want anybody else to know?
He was at the freak off.
They're elected by constituents, but they're paid for by private industry. I don't see how that's okay.
You've just nailed the problem with the American government.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Let me hide that.
Yeah, it's my other big issue is that they keep changing they keep moving the goalposts. Like, you don't know what we know, but if you knew it, you wouldn't want to know it because we know it. We can't tell you, and it's too much for you. You can't handle it. And it's like, well, I don't know. We can handle a lot.
I don't think it's their right to choose anyway.
Yeah, first of all, this is an unelected group of bureaucrats that were hiding this for decades. And we have to basically ask, where have they made the decision? What's brought them to this point that they can just choose for us what we get to know and what we don't get to know? And how is any of that?
As it relates to nuclear secrets and the making of high-end technology. Hey, Daddy.
My little guy is here.
That's probably a cue that we need to wrap it up soon.
This is my cue. This is my my little alien. Say hi, Jack.
Hey. Secrets as it relates to national security, I get, but when it's fundamental truths related to you as a human being and what it means to be a human, and to go on what Danny was saying earlier, the human experience and figuring out what it's all about, they have absolutely no right to tell us. If we're living in a simulation and we're not real, or there's a kid, looking at us through a magnifying glass somewhere in a higher dimension, that's scary, yeah, absolutely. But they have absolutely no right to tell us that we have no right to know. You don't have to tell me how to make a nuclear bomb, or to tell me how to achieve faster than light travel, but you can tell me that our true history, you can tell me what it means to be a human, you can tell me what these NHR really are. You know what I mean?
I think that's mostly what people want to know.
Yeah.
And I think also beyond that, but it opens a can of worms, doesn't it? Because like once you admit that this technology is real and that we have it, people are going to want it. They're going to want to see it. They're going to want to know, like, how do we use this to better our situation? And that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable who are in power, because the technology is incapable. It's incompatible with the power structure that we have. I think they know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, look at the size of the reactor. We talked about Project Gravatar. We're going to talk about it more next Friday, which is something that we should probably announce before we wrap. But the size of the reactor in the sport model is the size of a toaster.
Yeah.
It's the size of a toaster. It's an antimatter reactor the size of a toaster. You could hold it in your hands. And Bob talks about it. He's like, yeah, you take the lid off and that's your unlimited energy right there. That's crazy. If we had access to something like that and we could put 10 of them around the world, how much power would we need, to power the whole civilization? I've got a melting toddler happening.
Let's wrap it up, Clay.
It's a meltdown. I got to wrap it there, guys. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
Let's say thanks to Danny once more.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you for being here.
He's here.
Thank you, guys.
It was great to have you. We'll have you back on. As always, if you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It really does help the channel. Don't forget to like and share the video. Don't forget to go to our website, teamnightshift.com. You can click on the Discord link and get involved in our Discord server. It's super exciting. It's the most fun conversation happening anywhere on the planet, and that's where you can find it. We'll be back next week. Monday, I'll be back solo for Members Only Monday, and then we're going to be doing Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays again. So we'll talk more about that then. But next Friday is going to be a big one, and I think we'll do a separate announcement on that one. So we'll come back to that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one, guys. Until then, keep looking up.
Happy Halloween, everyone. Anyone.
Everybody be safe out there.
Everybody. I'm safe out there. Everybody, safe out there. Everybody, safe out there. Roll. Everybody, safe out there. See you next time.